The wind off the bay smelled like diesel and low tide, and the man in the lighthouse keeper's cottage hadn't moved from his chair in 20 minutes, which was exactly long enough for Deputy Hal Brennick to start wondering if something was wrong with him. It wasn't. Frank Calloway just liked to watch the water before a storm. 3 days now, the town of Eastport Cove had been choked tight with state troopers and a federal task force, all of it circling a stretch of coastline 4 miles north, where a group calling themselves the Tideborne had taken over an abandoned naval research station and were holding 2 engineers hostage. Nobody knew exactly what the Tideborne wanted. Money, mostly, judging by the demands. But they had old Soviet-era jamming equipment and a small armory, and they'd already proven they weren't bluffing by putting a warning shot through the windshield of a Coast Guard cutter. Frank Calloway sat in a wicker chair on the porch of the keeper's cottage he'd lived in for 19 years, mending a crab trap with hands that moved slow and sure, like a man with nowhere else to be. Beside him, curled in a patch of late sun, was a one-eyed cat named Skipper who'd wandered up from the docks one winter and simply decided to stay. "Same as yesterday," Brennick said into his radio, eyes on the cottage from the patrol car parked at the head of the gravel drive. "Old man just sits there." Sheriff Donna Pruitt didn't answer right away. She was 61 years old, had policed this stretch of coast for 30 of them, and she had a complicated feeling about Frank Calloway that she'd never been able to put into words. He'd shown up in Eastport Cove 19 years back with a battered truck, a government pension nobody asked too many questions about, and an offer to take over lighthouse maintenance for less than the town was paying. He fixed things. He kept to himself. He played checkers on Sunday afternoons at the diner, and never once, in 19 years, raised his voice. But there was a stillness to him. Pruitt had seen it the first week he arrived, when a nor'easter knocked a boat loose from its mooring and 3 fishermen got dragged out past the breakers. Calloway had been the one standing at the end of the dock, not panicking, not shouting orders, just watching the water with an expression like he was solving a math problem. Then he'd grabbed a line and gone in after them himself, and pulled all 3 out before the Coast Guard even arrived. That of calm wasn't retirement. That was something else, and 30 years of police work had taught Donna Pruitt to recognize the difference. "He knows what's happening," she said into the radio. "Everybody in this town knows. Does he care?" Pruitt watched the old man's hands work the crab trap, unhurried, precise. Hard to say with Frank. It was Special Agent Russell Doyle who decided to find out for himself. Doyle had flown in from the regional field office 2 days earlier, 34 years old, sharp creased suit, already wrinkled in the salt air, and a habit of talking to local law enforcement like they were furniture that happened to know the roads. He'd taken one look at the map, seen that Calloway's cottage sat inside the security perimeter they were establishing for a planned nighttime operation, and decided the old man needed to be removed. "That's the lighthouse keeper?" he asked, nodding toward the cottage. "Frank Calloway," Pruitt said. "Caretaker, technically. Lighthouse hasn't had a real keeper in 50 years, but somebody's got to run the generator and keep the lamp working. He's sitting inside our staging zone. I need him gone before nightfall," we asked. He said no. Doyle's jaw worked. "This isn't a request, Sheriff. We've got assets moving through this area in." He checked his watch. 6 hours, and I can't have a civilian compromising a federal operation because he likes his porch. He walked down the gravel drive himself, his city shoes slipping on loose stone, while Pruitt watched through the windshield with the specific dread of a woman who'd seen this kind of confidence meet a wall before. Calloway didn't look up from the crab trap as Doyle approached. Up close, the agent could see things he hadn't from a distance. The way the old man's knuckles were thick and uneven in a pattern that didn't match a lifetime of lighthouse maintenance. The way his eyes tracked Doyle's hands and feet without ever quite settling on his face. "Mr. Calloway, Special Agent Russell Doyle, FBI. I need to inform you that you're being evacuated from this property for the duration of an active federal operation." Calloway set the crab trap down. "Afternoon," he said, in a voice like gravel settling. He didn't get up. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you fine, son. I'm not going anywhere." Doyle's mouth tightened. "Sir, there are armed hostiles 4 miles from here. This isn't a discussion about property rights. It's a matter of your physical safety." "I've lived on this coast 19 years, Calloway said. "I know exactly what's 4 miles from here." He looked up then, and Doyle felt something shift in his chest, a small cold drop, like missing a stair in the dark. The old man's eyes weren't frightened. They weren't even particularly interested. They had the patient, assessing quality of someone watching a storm decide which way it would break. "With respect," Doyle said, recovering, "you don't have the operational picture I have." "Maybe not," Calloway said. "But I've got Skipper here, and he doesn't travel well, and I've got a generator that needs tending before dark, because if that light goes out, every boat working this coast tonight is running blind." He nodded toward the lighthouse, white and weathered, rising up from the rocks behind the cottage. "You want to evacuate somebody, evacuate yourself. I'll be fine." Doyle might have pushed further, might have threatened the kind of paperwork that makes stubborn old men reconsider, but his radio crackled to life with a burst of static and a voice reporting that the Tideborne had deployed some kind of electronic countermeasure, scrambling half the task force's communications. He turned away from the cottage, already half forgetting the old man existed, already pulling his earpiece in tighter, the machinery of the operation reclaiming him. He didn't see the way Calloway watched him go, didn't see the flicker of something that might have been pity cross the old man's face, the look of someone who'd spent a career cleaning up exactly this kind of overconfidence. Back at the patrol car, Pruitt lowered her binoculars. "Well?" He got told no, Brennick said, grinning despite himself. Pruitt didn't smile. She was watching Calloway, who had gone still in his chair, head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something underneath the wind. She'd seen that posture exactly once before, the night of the nor'easter, half a second before he'd gone into the water. It made the hair on her arms stand up now the same way it had then. The light went out of the sky slow and reluctant, the way it does on the coast in late autumn, the gray deepening to violet, the violet deepening to black. The wind picked up. Out on the water, the lighthouse beam swept its patient arc, and somewhere behind the cottage's drawn curtains, the lamp that ran on a different kind of fuel entirely was about to switch on for the first time in a very long while. Inside, Frank Calloway moved through his own house without turning on a single light, his bare feet silent on floorboards he could have walked in his sleep. His hands, which an hour ago had looked like nothing but a fisherman's hands, moved now with a precision that belonged to a different life. He crossed to the back bedroom, to an old steamer trunk that had sat under the window for 19 years, collecting nothing but dust, and the occasional curious glance from visitors who assumed it held wool blankets. He didn't use a key. His fingers found a seam along the trunk's brass corner trim, pressed in a sequence only his hands remembered, and a false bottom released with a soft mechanical sigh. Beneath it, a hard case, foam cut, holding a radio set that looked like museum equipment and weighed like a small anchor. He lifted it out the way another man might lift a sleeping child, careful, practiced, almost tender. He ran the antenna wire up through a gap behind the window casing he'd drilled himself the second week he moved in, a hole no inspector had ever noticed because no inspector had ever been looking for it. He sat with the headphones on for a long moment before switching anything on, just breathing, in, out, slow and counted, a rhythm hammered into him so long ago in a jungle half a world away that it had outlasted the names of most of the men who'd taught it to him. He was listening to the house, to the wind working at the lighthouse glass, to the tide pulling at the rocks below. This place had taken him in 19 years ago the way a wound takes a stitch, and it had healed him, mostly, except for the part that never fully closed, the part that came alive now, slow and certain, like a muscle remembering its old shape. The men on the research station were noise, sloppy, arrogant noise, jamming frequencies like children banging pot lids together, certain the racket made them invisible. Calloway had spent a career teaching young operators that silence was a weapon and noise was a confession. The Tideborne had confessed everything the moment they switched on their scrambler. He powered the radio on. Static rolled through the headphones, familiar as an old hymn. He turned the dial with the unhurried precision of a man who wasn't searching, who was listening for the absence inside the noise, the seam between signals where something else might be hiding. At the command post set up in the volunteer fire hall, Agent Doyle was 3 cups of bad coffee deep into a crisis. "What do you mean we've lost the channel?" "It's not just jamming, sir," the young communications tech said, sweat beading at his hairline despite the cold building. "It's inserting ghost traffic. We're getting reports of units in places they aren't. Whoever built this rig knew exactly how to make a network doubt itself." Doyle slammed his palm on the folding table. "So we're blind." In the corner, Sheriff Pruitt stood with her arms crossed, watching a room full of federal agents argue with laptops, while the answer, she was increasingly certain, sat 4 miles south in a wicker chair on a porch. She'd offered her knowledge of the coastline twice already. The sandbars, the old smuggling paths through the marsh, the places where a boat could land unseen. Both times Doyle had nodded at her the way you nod at a weather report you've already decided not to trust. Outside, parked at the head of Calloway's gravel drive, Deputy Brennick caught the faintest pulse of light from a back window of the cottage. Not a lamp's glow, something colder, flickering, like the breathing of old vacuum tubes warming in the dark. He raised his binoculars. By the time he found focus, the light was gone, the cottage a flat black shape against a flatter black sky. But the stillness had changed. He couldn't have said how he knew. It had gone from the stillness of a man waiting out a storm to the stillness of a trap closing. He keyed his radio. "Sheriff, Brennick, something you should know. Saw a light in Calloway's place. Gone now." But it felt, he hesitated, embarrassed by the word before he said it. It felt like the whole property was holding its breath. A long pause on the line. "Copy that. Stay sharp." Inside, Calloway found it. A thread of carrier wave buried beneath the Tideborne's clumsy interference. A frequency that had no business existing on any current registry. A back-channel protocol designed for the exact kind of emergency when every other line had already failed. He coaxed it clean, the static resolving into a faint pulse, a digital handshake reaching back across decades. His thumb hovered over the transmit key. He hadn't keyed a mic like this in over 30 years. The words were buried under a lot of seasons, a wife buried in the churchyard up the hill, a son lost too young to a war this country had already half forgotten, 19 years of crab traps and lighthouse maintenance and Sunday checkers. But buried wasn't the same as gone. He pressed the key. Compass rose, compass rose. "This is Anchorstone, I say again. This is Anchorstone on frequency indigo. Do you copy?" Static answered him for 10 seconds. 20. He was drawing breath to repeat the call when a voice cracked back, young, sharp with disbelief, layered under the hiss of heavy encryption. "Unidentified station, you are transmitting on a restricted frequency. Identify yourself." Calloway keyed the mic again, his voice flat, unhurried. "Get your watch, officer. Tell him Anchorstone is up. Authentication is Romeo Tango Foxtrot 6. Romeo Tango Foxtrot 6. He released the key, RTF 6. A designation that hadn't been active on any roster in 3 decades, that existed now only in archived files. Most of the men reading them had never been cleared to open. The silence that followed stretched a full minute. He could picture it. A young sailor in a windowless room somewhere, pulling a supervisor by the sleeve, the supervisor pulling someone more senior, the slow chain of disbelief climbing rank until it reached someone old enough to remember what the designation meant. When the voice returned, it had changed entirely. Older, steadier, careful in a new way. "Anchorstone, we have you. Stand by." Not a question. A door, opening on hinges nobody had oiled in 30 years. Calloway let the tension drop out of his shoulders just slightly. The hard part, being believed, was done. Now came the part that mattered. He didn't reach for a map. He didn't need one. For the next several minutes he spoke in a low-level monotone, describing the coastline the way a man describes his own hands. "Be advised, your charts on the inlet are 18 months stale. Sandbars shifted 40 yards east since the spring storms. Opens a channel a boat can run dark at low tide if you know the line. The old smuggling trail through the marsh, north side, still passable on foot, comes up behind the research station's seaward fence with no line of sight from their watchtower. They've got a man posted up top, exposed from the southeast at maybe 25 degrees. Winds out of the northwest tonight, 8 knots, gusting higher. It'll carry your approach sound out to sea instead of back at them if you come from the south." He spoke for nearly 10 minutes, laying out a tactical picture no satellite photograph could replicate. The place where the dock pilings had rotted soft enough to creak under weight, the exact stretch of beach grass, tall enough to crawl through unseen, the particular way moonlight came off the water on a night like this, and through long shadows a careless man might walk straight through. It was an intelligence briefing and a love letter to the same 4 miles of coastline, indistinguishable from each other in his voice. When he finished, the silence on the other end carried something new. Reverence, plain as weather. "Copy all, Anchorstone. Assets redirecting now. Your local command post needs to go dark. Too much chatter on open channels and we can't risk it. Tipping the targets." "Acknowledged," Calloway said. His last transmission was 3 words. Anchor stone, out. He switched the radio off. The room dropped back into full dark and full silence, and he sat there a moment longer with the weight of 3 decades settling slow across his shoulders. He hadn't been Anchor Stone in a very long time. He was Frank Calloway, Lighthouse caretaker. But tonight the caretaker had work waiting. At the fire hall, Doyle was approving a drone flight he had no real confidence in when a call came through on a line that bypassed the chaos of the command post entirely, a secure satellite phone nobody on his team had even brought into the room. He answered, listened, and went the color of old paper. "Sir?" the tech asked. Doyle didn't answer. He crossed the room to Pruitt, and whatever had been holding his posture upright for 2 days had quietly let go. "Sheriff," he said, voice low, "I just got a call from NAVSPECWARCOM, Naval Special Warfare Command." He swallowed. "They told me to stand down. All assets, local and federal, power down, hold position, await instruction." Pruitt raised an eyebrow. "From who?" They wouldn't say. Just that. He looked almost embarrassed to repeat it. "The man on the ground has it handled." A cold understanding climbed Pruitt's spine inch by inch. She thought of Calloway's hands, of the night of the nor'easter, of 19 years of a man who never raised his voice and never once needed to. Deputy Brennick burst, in a moment later, eyes wide. "Sheriff, you're not going to believe this. Roadblock just got a call. Clear the coast road. Unmarked vehicles coming through, no lights." The fire hall went silent. Every face turned to Pruitt, and she felt the full weight of a situation that had outgrown her completely, and underneath the weight something almost like relief, because she understood now exactly where the real chain of command had been hiding the whole time. Not at this folding table covered in maps. Down the road, in a wicker chair under a lighthouse beam. Frank Calloway walked out onto his porch and sat back down. Skipper lifted his head, thumped his tail once against the boards, and settled again. Calloway didn't sit to wait. He sat to watch. He didn't wait long. They came without headlights, a line of blacked-out trucks moving down the gravel drive, with a silence that didn't belong to vehicles that size. Tires barely disturbing the loose stone. Men spilled out wearing night vision, moving in the kind of coordinated quiet that looks almost gentle until you understand what it's built for. They formed up in a loose perimeter around the cottage, more men than the drive should have been able to hold. More than Eastport Cove had ever seen gathered in one place that wasn't a 4th of July parade. Doyle and Pruitt had driven down separately, parking well back, watching with the particular stillness of people witnessing something their minds hadn't caught up to yet. Brennick stood beside them, openly counting the figures and losing track twice. One man broke from the formation and walked toward the porch, helmet still on, carrying no visible rank but moving with the unmistakable economy of someone everyone else automatically made room for. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and took the helmet off. He looked up at Calloway for a long moment before he spoke, and when he did, his voice carried clean through the cold air, stripped of performance. "Anchor Stone," he said. "We're here." Calloway gave a slow nod. "Took you long enough, son." A faint smile crossed the younger man's face. Had to dig the old book back out. Not a lot of people left who remember that frequency. He glanced back at the formation arrayed across the yard. 2 full troops and a Tier 1 detachment. "You called in the whole family, sir." He climbed the steps, stood before the old man's chair. "What's the picture?" "1 hostage, a researcher named Hollis," Calloway said. 5 hostiles confirmed at the station. 2 more on roving patrol along the seaward fence. They're disciplined, but they're proud, and pride's a worse leak than any radio. They think their jammers made them ghosts. He pointed toward the marsh tree line. "Command element sets up there. You'll have eyes on the station, but the dune line covers you from any angle they've got." He looked toward Brennick. "Deputy, the old smuggling trail behind my property line, you know it?" Brennick startled at being addressed directly. "Yes, sir. I do." "Show them." Gets them 3/4 of the way under cover. A nod from the commander sent one of his men jogging toward Brennick, the 2 of them vanishing into the dark a moment later. Doyle finally found his voice, climbing the porch steps with the look of a man watching his own certainty dissolve in real time. Who are you?" Calloway turned to him, and there was no satisfaction in his face, only a tired kind of gentleness. "I'm a caretaker," he said simply. "Frank Calloway." The commander answered the question underneath the question. "Master Chief Petty Officer Frank Calloway, retired. One of the original cadre that stood up our deep reconnaissance doctrine. He wrote half the manual we still train on." He looked at Doyle. "The jamming pattern your people couldn't crack tonight. He designed an early version of the countermeasure decades back. He didn't just recognize it, he recognized his own handwriting. Doyle's mouth opened and nothing came out for a moment. I had no idea. That was the point, Calloway said, not unkindly. He turned back to the commander. Their comms are their weak point. They lean on that jammer like a crutch. Cut it, they'll panic and scatter, and that's your window for the hostage. The commander listened the way a student listens to the person who wrote the textbook. We'll handle it, Master Chief. He put his helmet back on, paused at the bottom of the steps. It's an honor, sir. Truly. Then he was gone, folding back into the formation, and the whole yard moved as a single organism, flowing out across the marsh grass and into the dark toward the research station, gone from sight within minutes. The truck stayed, dark and silent. Calloway sat back in his chair. Sheriff Pruitt climbed the steps slowly, hat in her hands, and stood looking at the man she'd known, or thought she'd known, for 19 years. Frank, she said, voice thick. All this time. Why didn't you ever say anything? Nothing to say, Donna, Calloway answered. I came here to be quiet. That part of my life was supposed to be over. Doesn't look over to me. He let out a breath that sounded like wind through old pilings. You can take the man out of the work. Sometimes the work finds him anyway. They were on my coast. That's not something I get to ignore. He looked down at his hands, turned them over slowly. These hands spent 30 years learning how to break things and 19 years learning how to fix them instead. Tonight, I had to remember the first part. An hour passed in near silence. Then, faint across the water, a handful of muffled reports, not explosions, just sharp little percussions like dry branches snapping far off in the dark. It was over fast. 20 minutes later came the low, building thrum of rotors, and a pair of helicopters swept low over the marsh. One peeled toward the research station. The other settled into Calloway's field, scattering loose grass in its downwash. The commander climbed out first, followed by a man in civilian clothes, dazed but upright, blinking against the dark like someone surfacing from deep water. The commander walked the researcher over to Doyle, spoke to him low and brief, then crossed the yard back to the porch, helmet off again. Hostage is safe, all hostiles neutralized, no casualties on our side. He said it the way a man reports the tide schedule. Good work, Calloway said. Found their jammer exactly where you said. Old Soviet hardware modified. They never even knew we were there. The commander hesitated. The men wanted to thank you personally. Calloway shook his head. No need, they did the work. Just tell them watch their footing on the way out. That marsh mud doesn't care about rank. We will, sir. The commander looked out over the dark water, the sleeping cottage, the patient sweep of the lighthouse beam. This is a good place, he said, mostly to himself. Worth holding on to. They're all worth holding on to, Calloway said quietly. The commander nodded, something passing between the two men that didn't need further words. A man looking, maybe, at a version of his own future he hadn't let himself imagine yet. He put his hand out. Calloway took it, the grip unhurried, certain, less a handshake than a passing of something that never quite goes out. The commander turned, climbed back into the helicopter, and was gone, swallowed fast by a sky thick with cloud. The trucks pulled out one by one, as silent leaving as they'd been arriving, until the only people left in the yard were Calloway, Pruitt, and a thoroughly humbled federal agent. Doyle approached the porch one last time, his suit ruined with marsh mud, his face stripped of every certainty he'd walked in with 2 days earlier. He stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up not at a stubborn old caretaker, but at something closer to a piece of country he hadn't known still existed. Master Chief Calloway, he said, formal, careful. I want to apologize for my conduct, my assumptions. I was wrong, and I was unprofessional about it. Calloway studied him a long moment. He saw a young man trained to read the world in threats and assets and protocols, who'd never been taught to read the people standing in front of him. You were doing your job, son, he said. No judgment in it. Just remember, the best intelligence doesn't always come through a headset. Sometimes you've got to slow down and listen to a place and the people who've spent their lives in it. He settled back into his chair. Go on now. You've got reports to write. I expect you'll find a way to make it sound tidy. Doyle nodded, unable quite to hold the old man's eyes, and walked back toward his car, a different man than the one who'd parked there 2 days before. He knew already that the name Anchor Stone would never appear in anything he filed. Some things didn't belong on paper. They belonged to the quiet places passed hand to hand between people who did the hard work where nobody was watching. Pruitt lingered, turning her hat over once in her hands, Master Chief, huh? Calloway let out a low, rusty laugh. Just Frank, Donna. Always just Frank. He looked out past the porch rail at the dark water, the lighthouse beam turning steady overhead. Generator needs its oil changed tomorrow. Lamp won't run itself. Prute shook her head, something between a smile and disbelief. I'll see you at the diner. Sunday checkers. Maybe, Calloway said, if Skipper's feeling sociable. She clapped him once on the shoulder and left him to the night. Frank Calloway sat alone on his porch with the cat dozing against his leg, the crickets starting up again in the marsh grass, the tide pulling steady at the rocks below. The danger was gone, folded back into the dark where it came from. He wasn't Anchorstone anymore. He was just an old man on a porch, watching the light sweep its patient circle out over the water, content for now to be the calm that comes after.